everybody, and welcome back to the Cinefile. This week, we are talking about Dunkirk from 2017. This is a part of our Nothing But Nolan series. Jake and I both watched it, and I think we have some pretty hot takes. So let's just jump into it. Jake, opening thoughts. Had you seen Dunkirk before, and what was it like on this watch or rewatch?
So I've seen it before. I remember seeing this in theaters. And I don't know if I have hot takes necessarily. I will say I liked this movie less this time than I remembered it. Like
Okay.
I went back, and everyone knows I'm a big IMDb user, and I was scrolling through, doing some research, looking through cast people, whatnot. Anyways, and I saw I had rated it a 9 stars out of 10, and I was just like, I don't agree with that. I mean, it's a decent movie. It's a good. I love what it's based on. Like, I love the premise of it, and I love the idea of it. I just don't know if it always is so successful in its execution, if that makes sense. It's, I mean, I feel like, for people who don't know, it's obviously about the Battle of Dunkirk. This is a real life event in 1940 when the Germans invaded France. They pushed them back to the sea. The British, it's called the British Expeditionary I can't talk now. The British Expeditionary the British Expeditionary Force. That was the army. And
the BEF.
The BEF, yes.
The BEF.
And they get pushed back along with, some remnants of the French army. I mean, most of them get wiped out because the Germans they roll through France quite easily, proving that this is not a repeat of World War One. So they bottle them up at Dunkirk, and basically the British are just like, well, we're screwed because most of our army is bottled up in a town, and we don't have enough ships to get them back. So
right.
That's really where we find this movie, because we, in classic Chris Nolan fashion, we waste zero time with anything. I mean, we get right into it. So it's we'll flesh things out as we go along, but I think it's a good movie. Could it be better? Yes. And I'll also say, I think watching it on a smaller screen rather than seeing it on that big screen for the first time, you like this movie a little less, or at least I did.
That is definitely understandable. I had not seen it all the way through, I don't think. I think I've watched most of Dunkirk twice. But when I was watching the end, I was like, oh, this is new. Is this the extended cut? So I've seen it a couple times, and actually I do like the ending. I like the ending of them kind of reading Churchill's speech to Parliament.
Yeah, he gave that speech on the floor of Parliament.
Yeah, so I liked that part. But this came out in 2017, and I believe Darkest Hour also came out in 2017, which is what won Gary Oldman the Oscar. And it's about the same thing, but from two different perspectives. And I would take Darkest Hour over this movie basically any day and twice on Sunday. The issues I have with this movie, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is story.
Yeah.
And what was the point of me watching this movie? Now, obviously, we understand that this is an important historical event. This was significant in World War II, but at the same time, I did not care about the characters because, and this was a choice. It's not like he's a bad filmmaker. This was a decision on his part, and I see why he did it. But if I don't have any narrative or story connection or emotional connection between characters, it's like, why am I watching this 2 hours of beautiful but visual noise?
Mm-hmm.
So I really struggled. Honestly, I struggled to watch it all the way through without pausing and doing something else. And as somebody that likes to watch a lot of movies and likes to watch them from beginning to end and likes Christopher Nolan a lot, I thought that was very interesting. So this movie, I don't even want to call it a war epic because I don't think it's a war epic. I think it's just a war film.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Saving Private Ryan, because it's got that like kind of realism to it, without the emotional hook.
Yeah.
You can't watch this movie going in, and like I feel like if you knew what Dunkirk was, the event, you would appreciate this film a lot more than if you didn't.
Right. And I think it's interesting because we're sitting here watching this as two Americans, and Chris Nolan is from the UK. He's British. And this is a very crucial event in the history of World War II, but it doesn't involve Americans at all. You know what I mean? And so
okay.
I would be interested to hear. I would want to hear someone's point of view from an audience member in the UK that watched this, because I almost want to equate this is like a British person watching an American Civil War movie, if that makes some sense.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's my hypothesis, because when we watch, war movies that involve Americans, you brought up Saving Private Ryan. Obviously, that's a combined US and British attack, but the story follows Americans because Steven Spielberg is an American filmmaker. And
right.
There are put it this way, I go through certain emotions watching that film because I've met people that landed at D-Day. I've met people that fought in France. I remember in my junior year in high school, for my American history class, we had to do an oral history project, and I interviewed a guy, he's now passed, Jim Warnicki, but he was in the second wave at D-Day and was in the Battle of the Bulge and won a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. So like when I watch like World War II movies, like I think of him, and that elicits a personal reaction. And so I almost wonder I would be willing to bet on this has a different reaction for British audiences than for American audiences.
Interesting. Why don't you, if you can elaborate on that a little bit? I want to look up a box office thing to see if your bet is correct. Actually, hold on.
I'm interested to hear those box office numbers. But it's like, and this is, all this I'm saying is kind of irregardless of, the filmmaking techniques, if you will. Those I would say are objective, whereas what the story means to you, we're getting into a little more subjective, right? But I mean, all film is subjective because every story is going to connect with people in a different emotional way. Did you find the numbers?
Right. I did find the numbers, and this is very interesting. It made $80 million in the UK, which is actually quite significant.
Yeah.
If we were to, so the domestic open was 50 million, which a lot of Christopher Nolan films open low, but they have good legs. But this movie was 80 million. Domestically, it made 189 million. But the UK is the number 2, obviously above China in this one. Number 2 market for this movie. It'd be really bad if like Japan was like the number 2 market.
Oh my gosh. Although they could probably watch it and say, we didn't do any of this. None of this is our fault. That was all Hitler.
France was the number 2. France was the number, the number 2 outside of the United States. Yeah. Interesting. Anyway.
And they were probably pissed because they wouldn't let the French people on the boats.
So I guess you're right. It definitely had a different kind of impact for people in the UK. But yeah, I I can kind of understand that, and that's why I'm hesitant to say that I like don't like this movie or it's a bad movie.
Mhm.
It's not a bad movie. It's expertly crafted. It's shot. It's so gorgeous. Now I will say none of the performances really stand out to me
Yeah.
all that much. Except I did text you that it was Kenneth Branagh as I basically just see him as Gilderoy Lockhart now. If he's not wearing the mustache or when he is what's his face but in those in murder mystery movies,
Oh,
if he Hercule Poirot,
yeah.
if he's not Hercule Poirot, he's just
There's been a
Gilderoy Lockhart.
murder.
Which I think, what did I tell you? I texted you something about it looks like Gilderoy Lockhart needs something from Wizard Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. But yeah, so I think this movie is expertly crafted. It just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
I also struggle with war movies because like a lot of times, and this is the case here, they don't have huge story beats. It's a
Mhm.
lot more. I mean, this movie does a great job of putting you in the action.
Yeah.
And that's the way it's shot, and that's the way it's meant to be watched. That's probably why you enjoyed it so much on a big screen, on like an IMAX screen,
Mhm.
because it was meant to really put you in the action.
Mhm.
But again, if I don't have a compelling story or compelling characters, it is so much harder to watch.
No, I definitely agree. And I think our lack of really a central character in this movie, or really even, a central performance, if you will, is really kind of what stuck out to me. Um, Talking about the story, one thing I think is important to understand, and I read this going into the movie when it came out. I like to I get myself in trouble sometimes because I stumble across spoilers, but I like to be informed about what I'm going to go to see, especially something I'm excited about, right?
Yeah,
I
Patty's picks, she'll spoil the movie for you.
Oh, Patty Spitler, the legend, the Hall of Famer. Uh
First ballot. First ballot Hall of Fame
of
film
course.
reviewer in Indianapolis.
And
Yes.
if you've ever met Patty Spitler, she is iconic and a legend. Anyways, what was I talking about? Oh, did a little research on this movie before I went in, and it's told in 3 separate time frames, which is like
Okay.
the most Chris Nolan thing ever,
Yeah. He likes
because
to play with time so
so
much.
much. I mean, like everything, like is I would say like almost all of his movies. I mean, Memento is like what like his second like full length feature.
Yeah, something like that.
His first one, I think they only made
It
for like
was,
6 grand or whatever.
yeah.
But
And Memento is like it plays with time so
it's told
much.
in like basically in reverse.
Yeah. Then you got Tenet, which is kind of similar in a way.
Yeah, it's just everything is played backwards. It seems like, and then you have this movie. Uh, Chris Nolan just loves playing with time.
Yeah, which
You
is
know,
honestly, it's cool. It's
yeah,
cool. It's
it
not.
is cool.
I can't deny it. But
It's
it's
here. We have the 3 separate time frames, and it's meant to make you experience how different soldiers experienced Dunkirk, how they experienced the battle. You had the people on the beach that were stuck there for a week waiting for a ride home. And then you had the fighters in the air who a trip to and from Dunkirk, you had enough fuel to do it in about an hour and a half. And then you had the civilians who come with who come with their personal boats, and it's
right.
about a day trip there and back. I read somewhere that Chris Nolan and some of the producers made the trip from UK to Dunkirk on across the channel. And it said the seas were so rough that day it took them 19 hours just to get to Dunkirk.
I saw that, which a 19-hour boat ride.
That would
I mean,
suck.
Gilligan couldn't even handle a 3-hour tour. You think? You think a 19-hour boat ride?
Skipper, the Germans are shelling us.
that man, I don't know why 19 hours just seems like is that how long people were on the Titanic? Like it just seems like so long to be on a boat. And as
Oh,
somebody that suffers from motion sickness, I need
yeah.
like an IV of Dramamine just going through it. And if it wasn't like if it wasn't non-drowsy Dramamine, that would just have me sedated for 19 hours while we're going across. Anyway,
Dude, it'd be like
yeah,
last week with Interstellar. You'd just be like, oh, just put me in hibernation.
yeah. Talk about playing with time. He plays with time a lot in that movie too.
Right. Yeah. Uh,
Um, but I would say, and Chris Nolan does the work here of trying to walk the footsteps best he can. Right? You said that he goes on that boat ride, but it's just clear from the way the story is structured or the events that he really wants you to get a feel for being on that beach, being in that boat, being in that plane. Which, by the way, Tom Hardy
mhm.
was the guy, the Royal Air Force guy.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't know that. Like at the end of the movie when he took off the mask, I was like, "Oh, that's been Tom Hardy the whole time." Like you couldn't tell. I mean, it
See,
doesn't like exactly have Maverick painted
yeah.
right over here that you can know. Like I had no idea. But I did the when he ran out of gas, that really reminded me of that Seinfeld episode where they just like drive on E because I I was like I feel it's so
Oh
relatable.
my gosh.
That was so relatable and I just thought it was really and I think it's then that the score cuts out
Hmm.
and it's just silent as he's
Yeah.
floating, and that was really cool too. One of the things that I read was that Kenneth Branagh was talking about bringing some of the people that experienced Dunkirk to the premiere,
Hmm.
and they said it was really realistic, really true to life. Except that what was the quote? So it says, according to Sir Kenneth Branagh, roughly 30 Dunkirk survivors who were in their mid 90s attended the premiere in London, England. When asked about the movie, they felt that it actually accurately captured the event, but that the soundtrack was louder than the actual bombardment, which
Savage.
is also, yeah, I mean, Christopher Nolan also likes to play with that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But I liked the score here. I thought it added a dimension
Hmm.
and it helped add tension when, since there's no real character development, you don't really get that tension.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah. So I really struggle about talking about this movie because it's really well crafted, but I just didn't care.
Yeah.
If I'm being plain, I just didn't care. And maybe that's saying something about how like I'm short-sighted or I need to care more about history that doesn't involve me. But if I'm being plain, it's like people were saying, "Oh, this should be nominated for Best Picture. This should have won Best Picture." I don't think it should have won Best Picture.
I would agree. Um, and I don't think there's anything wrong with I don't think there's ever anything wrong with liking or not liking a movie. Obviously, I said it in this episode. I'll say it till the day I die. Film is so subjective that it's going to connect with everyone based on your own personal interests, experiences, prior information. Um, the list goes on and on. So we're looking at this as like, okay, here we're trying to break down the craft of the movie, right? That's kind of what this podcast is about. We're breaking down and analyzing the craft of this movie and how we experienced. And you people at home, there are probably some of you out here watching this that like think Dunkirk is the best thing ever. And there are some people out there that think it sucks. And both are valid and okay. Because that's the beauty of movies, is that it speaks to everyone differently. So
Right.
um don't
Yeah.
don't feel bad about not liking this movie. Like I said, I liked it less on this rewatch, but I still like it. Um, really, I think the best way I can sum up this movie is it's Chris Nolan's most like art film movie of his filmography.
Okay.
because
Yeah, I can
because
see what you mean.
because it really, we focus on everything except story, I feel like. And it's telling this movie from three different point of views, like he's trying to do, is I think a very interesting concept. And especially when you're trying to make people experience the breadth of how people experience the Battle of Dunkirk. It's an interesting concept, but I think from what audience expects from a movie, I think it's then hard because you're not able to have that much character development. Pardon me. You're not able to spend time dealing with your characters and dealing with relationships and getting into backstory and building character and building, the world around them. I mean, unless you're Lord of the Rings and you're going to take like 4.5 hours to make a movie. um, Literally, that's like the only comparison I can make to like a movie that's successful with like telling such like scattered and distant stories. But even to make that comparison, everyone starts together in Lord of the Rings, and then we branch off. So we
Right.
have
You
this
got
like
the fellowship.
this initial bonding, whereas
Mhm.
really our characters, there's no like real connection to each other,
Yeah,
except
I think
except
some
in
of
like
them
coincidence
don't
at the
even.
end.
Yeah, like some of them don't ever meet each other.
Yeah,
Um, or in the case of like Harry Styles' character, which honestly, pretty good performance.
yeah.
This was like significant because this was Harry Styles' like first real big acting role.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually thought he did a really good job. But like they kind of and then the kind of the one we start following at the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously he kind of meets Kenneth Branagh's character, but yeah, it's so kind of scattered, which obviously makes sense with the event that there's not a lot of interaction between characters, and so we can't build on relationships when there aren't any.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if we're talking cinematography, this movie is beautifully shot.
Oh my
I
gosh.
actually I really liked the way it looked. I mean, from the very opening, when you got those leaflets that are
Yeah.
like floating in the air, and he goes and grabs one, and you kind of have this like kind of tracking shot following them as they're walking, and then obviously they get shot. Two of the three of them, three, only one survived.
Yeah.
Um, and just from that beginning, then to the choice of kind of wide, I mean, because Chris Nolan used IMAX cameras, um, but some of the choices of the shots just made it feel so big,
Mm-hmm.
which helped in the scope. But I even thought some of the flying stuff. There's a shot in particular, and it's looking almost like it's on the side of the plane,
Mm-hmm.
and it's looking forward. That for some reason I'm such a like a sucker for that shot.
Does it
Whether it be
remind
a
you of Top
plane,
Gun Maverick?
yeah, Dick kind of remind me of Top Gun Mavericks Elite. Um, but I thought the cinematography and also the color grading.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it is about this color grading, but I mean, it's got me.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's almost like if it goes a little bit darker and there are more kind of blue overtones, you're like, this is cinema.
Yeah.
Like
In a
we're
way.
trained. I mean, heck, did you watch the last four Harry Potter movies? I mean, they all progressively. Somebody said it looked like they took a camera and then they took a glass of like hot tea and put it in front of the lens, and that's what it looked like. And then they filmed it because I mean, it just gets darker and darker and darker.
Yeah.
Um, but I really like the cinematography here for sure.
Oh yeah, I loved it. I think it's the strongest point of this movie. Um, is beautiful in its like starkly barren, and it almost, it feels desperate in a way. Like I don't know how to
Interesting.
describe
Okay.
it. Like to me, like I think it's the extreme wide shots, and like how like they make everything around them look like beautiful, like with what you're saying with the color grading, they make everything look beautiful, but at the same time, like it's craters, it's filled with bullet holes, it's broken, it's on fire, it's the water's full of oil, and the streets, these
Yeah.
beautiful French cobblestone seaside streets, are converted in, are blocked off with sandbags to make defensive positions. And so it's this like it watching this, it made me think of two other movies. It made me think of 1917,
Okay,
which
sure.
is the year after that, right? I believe that's a 2018 movie.
18. We saw it in theaters together, I think.
We saw
Yeah.
it. I remember that.
Because
With
the
that,
whole big idea was that it was just one long take.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which that's shot by the master Roger Deakins.
He's a legend.
That was gorgeous. And then it also reminded me of All Quiet on the Western Front from last year.
That is a beautifully shot movie.
Again, it's like it's able to find beauty in like the desolation and like the stark desperateness and in the bleakness of the landscape that has been ravaged by war, but somehow they're able to make it look cinematic and beautiful at the same time, which I find just really, really interesting.
There's something that you said a little earlier that I kind of had like a kind of a moment of enlightenment. Um, if you guys didn't notice it, if you're watching the podcast on YouTube, go back, you'll see I literally go like that. Like I have a moment of enlightenment. But part of the reason, I think the reason why they shot this the way they did is because you feel so alone. Think
No.
of I know, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it actually, I think the reason we like it so much is because it adds to, it's almost like the camera is a character in a way. It adds to this idea of them being stranded. I mean, look at the aerial sequences. There are at most 3 planes in the sky. Or look at the boat sequences with Mr. Dawson and Barry Keoghan. And there's nobody else around, maybe one boat, and then that gets shot down. Or look at the beach when you're following. I mean, there are tons of people, but even the way they are standing, there's so much sand.
Yeah.
Obviously they have the dark uniforms, but the screen is filled with sand. I'm gonna make a Anakin joke here about how he would hate this movie. Because Anakin Skywalker hates sand. But
coarse and rough.
Not like you. You're soft and smooth. What a player, bro. Anyway, that's for another pod. But so if we were watching this movie, we're looking at the cinematography. It is purposeful, and I think. See, I'm kind of, one of the things that I love about this podcast is that I can start out with one opinion and I can kind of build it, which for those of you that didn't know us in college, I would do this all the time with Jake. When I had to write a lot of papers, I would call him up or we would be hanging out or something. I specifically remember color theory and Blade Runner 2049 because like I needed you to break that down for me. And obviously when I get the ball rolling, when Jake helps start the ball rolling, hold on, here's a ball. Anyway, when Jake gets the ball rolling, right, then it kind of speeds up because he says certain things that kind of click for me, right? And so we actually even saw this in this podcast where Jake said something that kind of clicked for me, and then now I've formed a different opinion. I think that the reason why we like the cinematography so much is because it helps tell the story in a very subtle but obvious way.
Yeah.
Because they could have decided to magic. They could have decided to take shots and kind of bring them closer, right? To having like these medium wide shots or even close up shots that, okay, you could do that and people could feel alone because it's like one person right in the shot. But by having these exterior landscapes that really build the world and build the environment, you can see how alone they really were.
Yeah, it really makes wonderful use of negative space and all the shots. And I
Right.
really enjoy that. And
Yeah.
to get back to your ball theory, to quote Heath Ledger's Joker from a couple weeks ago, all it takes is a little push.
Yeah.
um Quickly, if we can, I know we touched on this a little bit, but I want to get back to not just I guess you could say the score, but like just like the soundscape, I guess, and how that plays into the film. I had some thoughts on it, but did you have anyone
Yes,
elaborate on?
I'm big on that, especially if it's done well. I there are two things when it comes to sound that are memorable for me. Not in this movie, but in general. When I'm watching a movie, I can either tell that the sound design was really well done, or I can tell when it was really poorly crafted. Christopher Nolan likes to do this thing where he plays with sound almost as like a character. And so he'll make things louder. That's part of the issue I had with Tenet is when I saw it in theaters, I could not understand half the dialogue, which I know you're not supposed to necessarily be listening to the dialogue, but at the same point, I needed to know what they were saying. So, and I think I've mentioned this before, like, so I knew halfway through that movie, I was like, well, I have to buy it because I need to watch it with subtitles. But I thought the use of, I don't know if it was the strings, like the violin, like the use of kind of that high pitched kind of drone, leaves you on edge, but it's not, in my opinion, or at least with the speakers on my TV, it's not so overbearing that it takes away, but it just helps keep you on edge. And kind of in the moment. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you bring up the high pitched drone, and I think that's very obviously this is scored by Hans Zimmer, a frequent collaborator.
That is so Hans Zimmer too.
Yeah, he's a frequent collaborator with Chris Nolan, and it almost reminded me a little bit of Joker's theme from A Dark Knight. You know, that high like unsteady, like it sounds unstable, like this, because it's just like it just building tension until you finally get relief. And the relief is usually in The Dark Knight, relief is usually a big fight or a big action sequence, and this is honestly, it's usually a cut, like a cutaway to like you cut off to like the other, like another setting, like one of the other, you know, you're in one time frame and you cut to one of the other two, which is like it, I think adds more to the tension, because you're like you just as I started like feeling anxious for these characters, you cut away to another scene. But no, I think that's a really big part of Hans Zimmer's work, but I think especially in Chris Nolan films, building that tension, they use the drones a lot. And then there's a constant ticking you hear. And so they actually recorded that off of one of Chris Nolan's pocket watches, which I think is so interesting.
First, the fact that it's a pocket watch, which is elite. And second, that they recorded it like that and didn't digitally make it or something like that. Yeah, that is actually really interesting.
And then like they would run it through like a synthesizer at some points, or like basically like pipe it into a keyboard, which Hans Zimmer loves, like taking like real sounds and then like manipulating the hell out of them through like,
he really does.
He literally like has I've seen he has a class on Masterclass that I watched through at one point, and this man literally,
you had like, a masterclass,
the website Masterclass.
Yeah, no, like you had a subscription.
I did. Yeah, when it like first came out, there's like a student discount. You can get like a year for like $30 or something, and like.
Well, now I want Masterclass. Anyway, please please talk about Hans Zimmer. We don't like, need to talk about how
the man literally has like a giant soundboard with like a bunch of faders hooked up to his computer that has like all these like it's not just like a cello sound, like it's the best cello player he could find. Like
Yeah. Okay. I
recorded
see what you're
him,
saying.
and like then he literally like has a keyboard, not like a computer keyboard, like an actual like playing the piano electronic keyboard that he can just like plug those sounds into and like completely just like distort and mess with. And it's such a it's such a non-classical way. It's such a non-classical workflow. I just feel like is really interesting, and I think that's why um his scores are always so unique and interesting, and really there's nothing like them, I feel like.
Okay, now is the time in the podcast where we do our rose, bud, and thorn. Jake, I'm going to pass it off to you as always. What are your rose, bud, and thorn for Dunkirk?
So Rose, I'm going to say cinematography. We just talked about it. This is such a stark, desperately beautiful film, and I think the cinematography is really where this film excels. And I would almost say like that's part of the point of this movie. Like you're supposed to sit back and like you're not supposed to think about the story, I think, so much as just experience the visuals and the sound of this movie. So I'm going to give a rose cinematography. Bud, I'm going to have two buds. One of them is the score. Now I know we just talked about how much I like Hans Zimmer's score, and I do. I think there's almost too much in this. Like I feel like we almost like rely on score a little too much for my liking. I would rather hear like more sound design, right? Like sound effects, if that makes sense, or like nat sound is what we call it in news. But I feel like we rely on the score a lot for our emotional beats. And there's sometimes it really just feels like noise, and I know that's probably the point, but it still like bothered me a little bit. But I really like the last act of this movie is the best act because everything starts to kind of like fall together and make sense a little bit.
Right.
And obviously it comes to an emotional climax, what emotional building there is in this movie. And I think also the score, like when Tom Hardy's flying through the sky on no gas, there's like it's simple but like mildly heroic and kind of lush at the same time, and I really liked that moment. I really like the score in that moment, so that's why it's going to be a bud. And this might be a hot take for you. I'm going to say another bud is the story, and the reason I say it's a bud and not a thorn is because I like the concept. I like this
Okay.
movie in theory, how they break up the story into like 3 different like time arcs. I just don't think it's executed to make a full enjoyable story, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm going to put it as bud. And then my thorn is that there's no leading performance. There's no character to drive our movie. There's no through line that cuts through all the stories. And I think that really is, for me at least, on watching it, I think that it makes it hard to follow. Especially when like you're in a frame of mind not expecting really kind of an art film like we talked about. I think this is Chris Nolan's one of his most art film movies. But when you're expecting like a traditional movie with, characters that you learn about and grow with and watch them and follow them through this movie, there's no character like that. And there are some, you've got Kenneth Branagh, you've got Mark
I was
Rylance.
like, where's Mark Strong in this?
Mark Rylance, excuse me.
He's the villain, obviously. Mark Strong's always the villain.
Because he always is.
Yeah.
Mark Rylance and Tom Hardy in this, you know, all actors I really like, but they're not given a big enough moment to really like make a meal of the performance, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
then like our other characters that we follow, like Fionn Whitehead, he's kind of, I guess you could say, the main character, but even really he doesn't feel like our main character. He's just the one that seems like we're with the most.
Right.
But like they wanted to cast a bunch of like young no-name actors because that was one thing I read that Chris Nolan that stuck out to Chris Nolan doing research about the Battle of Dunkirk was that it was fought by mostly young, inexperienced troops. And so they wanted to go with young, like kind of no-name actors at the time, which is an interesting concept, but I always feel like it rarely works out.
That's like the was it 1517 or 14 or 1817 of Paris, that Clint
Oh
Eastwood
yeah,
movie
yeah,
where
yeah,
um he actually put the people that were on that train in the movie.
yeah,
Yeah, which is it borderlines on gimmick.
yeah,
I think it is a gimmick.
kind of,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and I don't think it works. 1517, the 1517 to
Yeah.
Paris, I think, is what it was. But yeah,
Um,
continue.
no, I think that um, doing no name actors and really not having um, a sizable performance to lead through this movie, and something that a really good actor can sink his teeth into, if you will. Um, I think is really to the detriment of this movie and makes it hard to watch and hard to follow at times. So that's going to be my thorn.
Yeah, I'll kind of start with Thorn as well because I mean, you basically kind of have already said my Bud and Thorn. Um, I would agree. I don't like when there isn't much story.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to relate to my characters uh, because I like to pull truths from them
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the time. Uh, and so not really having a lead character or like an emotional anchor in that way, I did not like. I
Yeah.
did not like it. Like I'll be honest. I mean, I like the idea, like you said, but I don't think it was executed well. I almost wish I knew the thing about it being three separate kind of stories and three separate time frames before I watched the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that would have given me a different perspective. And when something like that happens, I don't want to have to be told that,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think the execute like the story and the lack of kind of character um really does bother me. That really is my thorn. Um and I guess what was I gonna say my bud was? Oh, that also is my bud because so I'm so confused about which one was the bud and which one was the thorn because the not having a main actor. Oh, that's what it was. Not having a main actor is the thorn. The story is the bud. So what I said about the fact there isn't really one,
Mm-hmm.
or there aren't moments, or obviously it's in a historical event, so there's a story to be told.
Mm-hmm.
But I really feel like even in it just kind of was almost like snapshots of life,
Yeah.
which is called
Weird.
no, it's not weird. That's not French New Wave, is it?
It
It
kind of
might
it has a
I
French New Wave kind of
it
flavor
might be
to it.
French New Wave. Yeah,
It's
this movie is and let me quickly pull up the definition of French New Wave for everybody.
yeah, definitely has kind of like that flavor to it of like being and it also like obviously like what comes before it in world cinema, we're getting really nerdy here, is Italian neorealism, which this also like Italian neorealism like anticipates French New Wave in a way, in that it's all about realism, um, hence why it's called Italian neorealism, and that's definitely something that French New Wave leans into and like builds off of. So
That's okay. Yeah. So I was thinking both French New Wave and Italian neorealism. So for the folks at home, French New Wave is a French art film movement that emerged in the late 50s, and it's characterized by the rejection of traditional filmmaking conventions in favor of experimentation and the spirit of iconoclasm, which is the social belief in the importance of the destruction of icons and other images or monuments. So the aspect that I think really is important has to do with the rejection of traditional filmmaking conventions. Specifically the fact that we don't have like a traditional protagonist or antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
I think the situation is the antagonist, but we don't have. It's almost like they're not even really named. Like we know who it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we
But
don't.
at the same time, it's not really. There's no emphasis put on it.
Yeah.
And the fact that he uses three different kind of ties, so it's experimental, and I think
Very
the
much
French
so.
New Wave goes with that. What I was thinking as well was Italian neorealism, because that very much is slice of life.
Mm-hmm.
And that does, you're right, kind of play into French New Wave. And so I think the slice of life of this is kind of just as it happened,
Mm-hmm.
without much much in the form of character development or things like that. Really does play into the Italian neorealism in this film.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Ironic that it's French New Wave and it takes place in France.
yeah, yeah. And at one point, they're waiting for the wave.
Oh, they need a big old wave to get them home.
And then my rose is also going to be the cinematography, it and the score or the sound design. I'll say sound design. I liked the use of sound design here. I think it adds to the film a lot. For me, it didn't really take away as much as it added to the tension, which is tension that I did not feel because I did not relate to the characters. So this allowed me to have that tension. And then the cinematography, we've already talked about how brilliant it is. I mean, we just kind of like stumbled upon how awesome it is. So yeah, so those are my rosebud and thorn. Now we talk a little bit about who we think we are. Jake, passing it off to you. Who do you think I am?
So obviously we don't have a lot of character building moments, so this is I'm
This
skating
is
on
like
some,
really hard. You're like, I think you are the boat.
yeah.
What? Like, you're the boat because you have layers or levels.
Oh, anyway, so we're skating on some thin ice here, but um I'm gonna say that you're George, which is played by a young Barry Keoghan. It's the kid that jumps in the boat before they take off and ends up getting knocked down and dies.
Dies.
Yeah.
Thanks for laughing at that, by the way.
You're welcome. That's not why I think you're George. I picked that because he jumps on board the boat when his buddy says, "Hey, come on, George, we're going to France." Without like really even questioning it, he's just kind of like, "Okay, I'll go along with the adventure." And I think that's very much you. Like most days, if you're not at work, I feel like I can be like, "Hey, you want to go do this?" And you're gonna be like, "Yeah," because you're always up for the adventure. I feel like I could honestly say like, "Hey, I'm going to Meyer. You want to go?" And you'd be like, "Yeah, I got nothing better."
Okay. True story. Today after church, we went to. I was with Adam and Emily, and we went to Rosie's place.
I
And
love
we were
Rosie's
leaving.
place. Shout out Rosie's place.
Yeah, shout out Rosie's place. And afterwards, they're like, "Hey, we're going to look for furniture. You want to come along?" And I literally was like, "Yeah, sure." That's why we had to record this an hour later, is because I was stuck looking at furniture.
Sure.
At Godby Home Furnishing. Not a sponsor.
We should get a sponsor.
We should get a sponsor. If you're interested, if you are interested in sponsoring us, or you maybe know a connection, make sure to email us at, what is it, the cinephilepod@gmail.com, or leave it down in the comments below. I know some of you talk about how we are Lucasfilm shrills, but since Lucasfilm doesn't sponsor us,
we wish Lucasfilm paid us.
Yeah, you all do understand. I wrote a 100-page thesis on Star Wars, so yeah, I kind of am a shrill. Anyway,
without getting paid.
Without getting paid, yes. So yeah, you've exposed me there with Barry Keoghan's character. For me, I would say that you are what's it? What's his face? Mark
Rylance?
Mark Rylance, so Mr. Dawson. Just because you're willing to do the right thing, even when somebody insane is like, turn around. It's like, you're like, why don't you go take a nap? And then he just keeps going. I think you have that willingness to do the right thing. Maybe even when it doesn't seem like it needs to be done. Or when you could reasonably not do it. So that was the character that really stuck out to me. Man, yeah, you exposed me with that Barry Keoghan thing though. That exposition right there.
More exposition in the entire film.
I wanted to like this movie. I wanted to like this movie. And as we go into final thoughts, Jake, I'd love to hear, did you like this movie? Like overall, what are your kind of final thoughts?
So once I like got back into the frame of this movie and like remembered what it was, I'm even hesitant to say I liked this movie. I thought it was a decent movie. And I thought it had some really good aspects to it. Like I said, I did not like it as much as I did when I went and saw it in theaters. I think this is very much an experiential movie. So I think going from, a screen you can measure in yards to a screen that is measured in inches is to its detriment. And going from 7 speakers and a subwoofer to a mono output from a HD TV.
Yeah.
I think, that experiential downgrade, I think, makes you like this movie less. So if you have an in-home theater system, please watch this, because it's probably better than watching it just on your regular TV.
And if you want to sponsor us to put in-home theaters in our houses, please send us an email or leave it in the comments down below.
But I mean, I think, I'm a huge history nerd. And so I like that aspect of it. What? Say it.
You're a huge history nerd. No shit. The only person I know that liked the Civil War nearly as much as you was my grandpa.
And that's why I got his books.
Yeah, actually, remind me to talk to you after the podcast because you can get some more stuff. Anyway, we're going through a storage unit.
Nice.
Yes.
But just overall, it's a decent movie. It has some very artistic aspects that I really appreciated. I think this is just another example of Chris Nolan pushing the envelope even more. I think that's really just kind of him as a filmmaker. He's pushing more and more and more. And even if it isn't always successful, it makes him an exciting filmmaker. And it's why we're doing a 3-part series, getting ready for Oppenheimer, because we're excited for what comes next.
That is true. That is true. For me, this is a movie that I wouldn't go necessarily rewatch all the time. I actually think this discussion changed my opinion just a little bit to appreciate the craft a little bit more, but I do stand by the fact that I am bothered by the lack of story, which actually makes it interesting now that we've had a bit of a discussion on French New Wave and Italian neorealism. But it exists.
Yeah.
This is an event in history that I didn't know about until I watched this and The Darkest Hour. So I'm glad to know about it, but at the same time, this is not something that when I talk about Chris Nolan films, it's not something that I'm like, oh, you need to watch this. Like I'm like, oh, you need to watch The Prestige or The Dark Knight, or Interstellar, which may be my favorite Chris Nolan film.
Mhm.
But yeah, or Inception.
Yeah.
So oh, speaking of time, we didn't even talk about Inception when we're talking about how he likes to
Right.
manipulate time. That literally is like the definition of that movie.
Yeah.
Well, it's not time streams. Anyway, so overall, meh. You know, not because it is not well crafted, but because it just wasn't my cup of tea, I guess you could say. But the real question is, what do you guys think? Did you like this movie? Did you not? Leave your thoughts, review, comment in the comments down below. We love to hear from you. Additionally, make sure to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell to get all notifications on upcoming content. We have our Oppenheimer review that is dropping within the week. We're excited to see that. We're excited to hear from you. We may also have a Barbie review. I know I'm seeing Barbie. I'm doing the Barbenheimer.
I've
You
been
know,
dragging my
hashtag.
feet against that. Um,
It like low key looks so funny.
I
It's
feel
like, can
like
I
it
speak to a
almost,
doctor? I am a doctor. Do you can I speak to a man?
I feel like I just talked about how you're always up for the adventure. I feel like you're gonna sucker me into going seeing Barbie.
Yeah, we're at Flix. We're doing a double feature for the employees of Oppenheimer and Barbie, which is like so legendary. But we've got that coming down the pike. Make sure to follow us on social media. We just got a Threads, the Instagram version of Twitter, which I'm not on Twitter. Jake's on Twitter. And you can make sure to follow us on Instagram as well and follow Cinefile on Twitter. We've got all the links down below. You know the drill. But until the Oppenheimer review, the Barbie review, the Barbenheimer of end of July. For Jake Biller, I'm Ben Sparrow. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week. And cut.